I go about? Okay,
You are there. You're on.
I am on. Okay,
Yes, you are.
okay.
We can see you.
Okay, great. Um, thank you. Well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you. Can everybody else see me? I mean, uh,
I think everybody can see you. Yep.
okay, great. All right, thank you. Thank you, Jenny, again for obviously it was a masterful organization effort, and thank you to the Independent for inviting me, and thank you all for being here at the end of the day. And maybe we could just all take a nice deep breath and kind of relax. And I know it's been a long day for me, and I can imagine what it's been for all of you too. And I hope it's been profitable. Um, I'm really thrilled to be able to speak to you about memoir because it's one of my favorite genres. And yes, it is a genre I've been published in. I see Jacob Weber is in this group. So I've also been published in with short stories, but this is my memoir. I've had a collection of short stories published, but this is my memoir, A Balanced Life. And it was published in 2018 um, by All Things That Matter Press. And so, what I want to do today is talk to you about memoir in general and talk to you maybe about memoir, what memoir is not. And I also want to talk to you about my own experience of writing memoir and what some of the techniques that helped me, because I don't know if all of you are just interested in writing memoir in general, or you really have intentions of writing your own. So that's what I'm going to do today. So, what is memoir? What is it? Well, memoir is a journey into the past. It is not a recounting of past events, but rather it is the lived experience of that past and the emotions which the memoirist is with skill and effort and yes, luck can conjure up with their words, whether that emotion is joy or sorrow or desire or fear. Um, so that if the writing is vivid, the memoirist conjures up that experience and relives that experience. And what the brilliant um, memoirist Vladimir Nabokov said, um, the present moment, the moment we're living in now, in memoir, becomes a ghost because what is real is the past. What becomes real for the writer and the reader is that past. Um, so the so that is in a sense the memoirist's task. In memoir, time becomes elastic. Time is actually an artificial construct. Oh, we've got 35 minutes to talk about memoir. Well, time is neutral. It doesn't divide itself into minutes. We divide time into minutes and seconds, and that's and in fact that's a very fairly recent development in humankind. Um, so time itself is elastic, and if the writing is of a sort of elegiac sense, the reader can experience this idea that time is pliable, ill-defined, stretches and contracts, and a good memoir is recursive. Now, please indulge me in this because it's going to become very apparent to you right away that what I am not is an artist, but writing memoir becomes recursive. And what I mean by that is the writer may start at a point in his past, circle round through that past, move forward again. Maybe, let's say he's in his 20s now, but he loops back to that pivotal event when he was 10 all right, and shoved his little brother off the garage roof or whatever. And then he circles around again, reaches his 40s, and then looks back maybe at his 20s, seeing how in his 20s that event from shoving his little brother off the garage roof was still haunting him, and determining some of the foolish things he did in the 20s. So memoir is recursive. It is not linear. And so it, in that sense, it really echoes the experience of memory, because we don't think we live with our memories all day long, but they are not linear. All right, one thing pops up, then another, oh, and then another thing from further back. For me, as a writer of memoir, this recursiveness was wonderful, because I have fundamentally a loopy mind. Call that ADD. Um, it takes courage to write memoir. It takes courage. Why do I say that? Because when you're writing memoir, you're standing back, you're an adult, you're looking at your past events. If you're honest, you're reevaluating those past events. You're reevaluating some of the bedrock beliefs that formed your personhood. All right. Maybe your mother didn't really love your brother more than she loved you. Oh, wow. You know, maybe she simply had a different way of demonstrating her love for you. Maybe your father wasn't a real schmuck for leaving your mother. Maybe your mother was a hysterical, clinging vine that stifled him completely. Um, so, in other words, it takes courage to admit that. And it takes further courage to, in admitting that, to realize you might be reconstituting your whole idea of yourself, because if your past wasn't quite what you've always believed it to be, well, then in the present moment, you're really a different person too. And that's why it takes courage. And it takes courage in another sense also. And this is that memoir, it, this is in the sense that you might discover you weren't quite as innocent as you always thought you were. All right. You might discover, oh, I was really sort of complicit in that event in which I thought I was the total sweet little victim. All right. You might, and you have to admit that to yourself. It can be very liberating to do that, to mature into that admission. But nevertheless, you may discover that, if you're going to be honest, that there were things going on in your own behaviors that were kind of provoked behaviors in others. Um, so it takes courage to see yourself in this new light and to admit this to yourself. And finally, there's another pitfall in memoir. And this is that, in as much as that memory itself is not reliable. And this is very important. The more we study memory, and psychologists and scientists study memory, this is why they're finding that eyewitnesses aren't reliable. Um, so memory itself is not reliable, and it's, you know, yourself, you and someone else, your best friend can witness an event, all right, and your interpretations of it are completely different. So maybe you actually can recount what you saw, but your experience of it, and that's where memoir transpires. It's an internal, relived experience. So your interpretation of an event can be completely different, utterly different. And I've seen that happen, you know. I mean, I've heard, I've seen that happen, because one time I was a juror, and my fellow jurors saw one thing from a witness. We both heard the same testimony, but I saw something else. Um, so that's sort of, in a sense, a brief overview, but I want to go on a little further and talk about what I call the keystones of memory, or the keystone of memoir. All right. Now, I'm sure there are other memoirs that don't use what I'm going to call as a keystone, but I found that if you really look at some of the great ones, that yeah, they're the writer is using a particular defining event or element. Um, so, what a keystone is, the stone in the center of an arch. It's what holds everything up. In the keystone of a memoir, it's what defines the limits of the narrative. It's what the writer needs to keep going back to in order to keep this recursive narrative um, on target, all right, generally moving forward, and to give the whole work unity. So, and that can be a unifying use of a unifying theme, a unifying element, or images. And let me give you some illustrations, what I mean about that, the keystone element. In Frank McCourt's really, really wonderful Angela's Ashes, the keystone is his father's alcoholism. All right. And he goes back to that and back to that. He could, he writes about his, what he calls his, miserable Catholic childhood, but it's deeper than that. I mean, he goes back and back to this re-examination of the alcoholism. In Mary Carr's wonderful uh, book, her wonderful memoir, Lit, it's her alcoholism, and she keeps going back and back to this alcohol. It's the unifying, defining element. In Russell Baker's wonderful Pulitzer Prize winning book, Growing Up, set in my town, Baltimore, it was the Great Depression, and Baker is his father is dead. He and his mother go to the maternal grandmother in Baltimore, and one by one, family members who have lost everything come to this little house, and he writes about, so the experience of the Depression becomes the defining aspect of his growing up. When I set out to write my memoir and I was thinking about it, I mentioned to a fellow writer in Baltimore, Rosalia Scalia, and Rosalia said, "Oh, Pat, you've got to read Refuge by Terry Tempest Williams." And I said, "Wait a second. I mean, Terry Tempest Williams lives in Utah. She's known as a nature writer. I mean, that's what she writes about, and she writes about it brilliantly, about the Utah desert. And she's a Mormon. So here I am, a little Catholic Polish kid who grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, lives on the East Coast, really likes urban living. What do I have in common with Terry Tempest Williams? Well, it turns out that in Refuge, Terry Tempest Williams uses nature to explore the death of her, the death of her mother from cancer, from breast cancer. And so Terry Tempest Williams and the mother go into nature, and then when the mother dies, Terry Tempest Williams continues to use nature to get some kind of understanding of what has transpired. So, what was my keystone? All right, what was my keystone? It was ice skating. Yes, let me explain to you. I'm sure, um, because I am not really an ice skater in any real sense of the world. But I grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, the middle of three daughters. My parents were the first generation of Americans. Uh, their parents had all come over from Poland. My parents were very intelligent people, but they were very fearful in some ways, very constrained in what they would venture forth to do. And it's completely understandable. One of my grandfathers had taken off, and he was completely absent. And so, of the remaining three of my grandparents, only one of them spoke passable English at all. So, my parents and their siblings and their friends were more or less left to interpret America, the freedom of America, the possibilities of America, the opportunities of America on their own. And so they decided, they did not venture very far. However, they were insistent that we three daughters have college educations, and I am incredibly grateful for them. But I also had polio when I was 6. So given the constrained circumstances of our lives and my own um, being uncomfortable with my own body, distrustful of my body because my body had betrayed me, and being plagued with having internalized my parents' anxiety and fear. Well, the whole idea of skating, when I got a pair of secondhand skates when I was 11, well, idea that you could be free and you could move gracefully and that you could transcend the uh, uh, boundaries of your circumstances, in a sense. It was very, very intriguing. So, was I a good skater? No. I have 4 or 5 times a year. I would go to some pond frozen in Connecticut and Bridgeport, skate, keep the skates, kept the skates, took the skates to college. Same pair of secondhand skates. And ultimately, my mother brought them down to me in Baltimore when I had my kids. Um, and again, 4 or 5 times a year, I'd go to a public rink, even though we were living near a private rink very close by. And when I turned 40 and was feeling pretty constricted myself, working at public relations jobs, trying to freelance articles, trying to raise my kids. And yes, I loved my husband, but there was a lot of, you know, uh, marriage. And So I was 40 and I decided that I was going to give myself skating lessons at that rink because they on Tuesday nights they had adult skating lessons, and that was sort of the beginning of my real devotion to skating. But I still never got very good at it. About that time, I started to just into my 50s. I was still writing freelance and so forth, early 50s, and I was also keeping a file of articles about skating, thinking that I was going to write a memoir. And the memoir I had envisioned was sort of like, wow, look at this Schultheis gal. She's working with and she's freelancing, and she's in PR, and she's raising these kids, and she's got a marriage going. Oh, and she skates. God, what a gal. And it was going to be sort of witty and self-deprecating. Well, when I was 52, and I remember this very vividly, it was a Sunday afternoon in March. Um, and I had been skating Sunday morning and taking a nap, and the phone rang. And my older sister, whom I loved very much, and who was actually the reason I had moved to Baltimore because she moved here 3 years before I did, but then she eventually moved to California. So she calls me from California and she tells me she has liver cancer. That was the end of March. by June, Sally was dead. Um, about 6 months after she died, I had my own very serious cancer scare, a very extensive operation. Thank God I didn't have cancer. On what was the first anniversary of her death, my younger son got married. 10 days after that, my father died. 2 years after that, Bill, my husband's older brother, died. 6 months after that, Bill got laryngeal cancer. Uh, then my older son got married. And then my mother died. All that happened in 5 years. 5 years. I was still skating, still intending to write a memoir, writing short stories too. Um, but I knew if I ever wrote the memoir, it would be very different. It would not be witty. It would be an exploration of what it means to when our bodies fail us, when our bodies can't do what we want them to, because skating is so much involved with time and distance. It would be an exploration of physics, and cosmology, in a sense. Uh, so I knew that it would be an exploration of very serious things. Um, I then intended to, also was very much interested in fiction. So I enrolled in the Johns Hopkins University writing program as a fiction writer, but they allowed me to take a course in memoir. I graduated in 2006. Uh, in 2007, Bill was diagnosed with lung cancer, and in 2008, he died. Uh, about a year or so after that, yes, about a year after that, I began writing my memoir, and as Terry Tempest Williams did with her book about her mom's death, I made it very clear in the beginning that this was going to be that Bill died. Bill was dead. So it was going to be an exploration of my life, with my early life, my life with him, and kind of trying to use a reconciliation, come to some kind of acceptance, reconciliation. And so I began writing. I think I had 4 chapters written. And my idea, I still wanted to link this to skating, was so I had written 4 chapters, and then I was going to shove some idea of skating onto, or attach it, onto each of these chapters. So whether it was going to be spinning or falling or something, I was going to write the chapters because I had this file of stuff, and then just sort of just force this association with skating. And then I went to the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and everything about the experience, and this was in 2010. I was a widow for maybe not 2 years. And so everything about the experience of going to the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts really heightened my sense of being alone. All right. I had to find someone to take care of the cat. I had to make sure the bills were paid, that the house was secure, load up the car myself. And because the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts is in near very significant historic sites, Bill would have driven me down there. He was a historian, but of course he wasn't available. So I got to the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, and it was nighttime. And the next day, I went to my studio, and here's my art getting a little better. See, this is comfy chair. Um, so I got to my studio, and I see comfy chair, and I put my new computer at the desk, but comfy chair is there. So what did you think I went to? I went to comfy chair, and I had all my research right beside me. And I had all my research there. And I thought, oh, you got here on your own, Pat. You really deserve to take a little break, maybe. You don't have to get to work. And so I pulled up this book, which is really one of the books that I had gotten preparation for this. And it's a book I had already read, taken notes on. And it's Balance, A Search of a Lost Sense by Scott McCready. Now, the premise of this book is that Homo sapiens has a sixth sense, balance, because babies, anyone who has been pregnant knows that babies somersault in the womb. All right. And you could feel them doing this. It must be fun or something, probably. And then they have to do a final somersault to come out head first, which apparently did not do. Um, and then many of the steps in maturation, from learning to walk or learning to ride a bike or skiing or skating, um, these are feats of balance. And so I started sitting in comfy chair. I opened up this book and I'm taking note, rereading it. And all of a sudden, I've got my 4 chapters already written, but all of a sudden, a sentence comes to me, and it was this: balance, I have read, is the action of not moving. I'm going to repeat that. Balance, I have read, is the action of not moving. Well, this is important for 2 reasons. The first reason is that I realized that my approach was wrong. All right. What I needed to do was think of aspects of skating and then go into I had diaries, and go into my diaries and my journals and my research and find out how I could write about that balance, that idea of skating, and how it can be used. That's my keystone to link it to insights about my life. So the first chapter, then I realized, is about balance and about my somewhat unbalanced family of origin and my search for continuity or support. Second chapter was about self display, because if you've ever watched skating, it's very beautiful, but it's also very sensuous. You could even call it erotic. Um, but those attenuated postures, the arched back, the the outstretched hands, the elongated legs, those are necessary for a skater's balance. Without those, they could be off an inch or two and lose their balance. They certainly wouldn't be able to perform the next move. So this self display, while I write about it, also for the chapter becomes my own search for love. All right, my own search for love, my own, and in frequently wrong places. And so it goes on through the skating boot, skating blades, edges, Olympians, because yes, I have skated not with Olympians, but I've been on the ice with Olympians. It's a real privilege. Um, so that sentence again illustrates now what I mean by the keystone. But were those first 4 chapters a waste of time? Absolutely not. They were what I needed to write to get to that light bulb moment. And it was a light bulb moment when I said, this is how to approach this. This is what it should sound like. The other thing I want to point out to you about that sentence is that the sentence suggests sort of an objectivity, a standing back. The tone is cool, analytic, all right? And a good memoirist has to be in two places at once. All right. He or she has to be in, is the adult person looking back at that moment, how far back they go, it doesn't really matter. All right. So they have, but they have, when they're writing about that past moment, they have to be in that past moment, but then they have to come back to be their present self. Um, I'm going to give you another example of that, if you like, and then we can kind of open it up to questions if you have any. Um, uh, this is a book called What Remains, titled What Remains, and it's by Carol DeFabio Radziwill. Carol DeFabio Radziwill was the second daughter of the five children of her parents, lived in New Jersey, and her mother had the five children before she was 24. So this was a very, a very boisterous, to say the least, family. Uh, they were decidedly working class, but Carol DeFabio was very smart and she was ambitious. And she got a job working at ABC News where she met a man named Tony Radziwill. Now, Tony Radziwill was the son of a Polish prince. And if you think we've got a little theme, Polish theme going on here, well, maybe we do. I don't know. Tony Radziwill was the son of a Polish prince. His mother was the sister of Jacqueline Kennedy. His godfather was the president of the United States. His best friend growing up was his first cousin, John Kennedy. Uh, but nevertheless, Carol and Tony get married. And the book opens, it's a preface. She doesn't even call it her first chapter, uh, with Carol Radziwill, up in Cape Cod with Tony Radziwill, her husband, who is dying of testicular cancer. He's a young man, she's a young wife, and they're waiting for John Kennedy to fly up there and be with them that weekend. And John Kennedy is flying up from New York with his own wife and his wife's sister, and they never come. They never get there. The plane crashes into the ocean. So that's not even the first chapter, that's the preface. First chapter begins with, and this is why I want to kind of hear this, because this is the idea of standing out, standing distant, all right, being distant. So the first chapter begins at Carol Radziwill's wedding in Long Island. I'll start with the fairy tale, she writes. I go unnoticed beneath the edges of the tent, under the billowing soft silk, at the fringe of light fingering through the baby's breath candle chandelier. Famed party designer Christian Tortue was flown in from Paris to create it. The sky, if I step out from under the tent and look up, is full of stars. The dark ocean, even, is lit up tonight because my mother in law has thought of everything, has tucked lights into the foliage along the dunes. The night is all twinkles and light and silver clinking on porcelain, seashells carefully picked, artfully scattered on the tables. Music floats out and drops on the waves like bubbles. The ocean slaps onto the sand like faint applause. And then she goes to the end because we already know how the story ends. I am fortunate, you might say. And that could mean anything. I will tell you what happened and let you judge for yourselves. Wow. Wow. Was she really fortunate? Notice that I love those two passages because I love the evocative writing of when she describes her wedding. I mean, you have no doubt about what that wedding was like. You know it. You're there with her, but she's not there. She's standing back and looking almost at the guests with real dispassionate look. And this is herself looking back at that event. And then she invites the readers. Her link is not so much with the people there, her link is with the readers. I'll let you judge. Who's the you? The you is the reader, all right? And so throughout this book, uh, Carol DeFabio, Radswell, plays with the idea of fortuna. Is it fate that chose Tony Radswell to have cancer? Or was it just chance? Did it just happen? Or was it fortuna? Did fortune point her finger at John Kennedy and say, I want you, I want your wife tonight? So this is what I mean with the keystone. This is because it comes up and up again. This idea of fortuna. So again, um, that's I think maybe my time is up. I'm not quite certain. Um, but anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this sort of exploration of what memoir is, my own writing of memoir, and maybe you've gotten some ideas for your own. I hope you have and found things that were useful. So, um, are we going to have some questions or?
So yeah, if folks have any questions that they'd like to ask of Pat while she's here, this is a fine time to type them into the chat session. People have been commenting as you've been chatting. I didn't catch any specific questions on the way by. Again, this is being recorded, so this will be available to all the participants. And if we have, I'm sure Pat would be thrilled to have.
Okay,
I
okay,
think we
I've
got
got.
one here.
Okay, what are some of my favorite memoirs? All right, well, the Confessions of Saint Augustine. Yes, you have to read that if they're really quite extraordinary uh, because it's so he's so self-aware there. Um, and Speak Memory by Vladimir Nabokov. I mean, I have read that book 3 times and I want to weep. It really is a work of genius. He was, no doubt. I love What Remains by Carol Radswell, Frank McCourt's Angela's Ashes. Um, let's see, Stop Time by, and its name always eludes me, um, but it was a very seminal memoir. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name. But Stop Time is a fabulous memoir. Uh, I'm not so big on confessional memoirs, but I do, occasionally read them, learn things. Uh, so those are some of them. Yes. Any more? Yes, Frank Conroy. No, not Frank Conroy. He wrote in some. I'm sorry, I can't. Uh, it's gone. But not no. It's not Frank Conroy. It refers to a musical, a piano. Uh, what Stop time is something that piano players do. All right, it's kind of a syncopation, I think, that and that's where the title comes from. Um, yeah. So uh, those are a couple of them. Uh, any more questions? Okay.
Pat, thank you so much for that. That was absolutely wonderful and gives us a lot to think about. Those of us who've been struggling with memoir.
Well, you've written your own, haven't you? Yes, you have.
No, not a memoir. Not a memoir. Mine was a novel.
Okay.
Something
Okay.
exciting has to happen to me before I can write a memoir. I know. I got that from what you were discussing.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. I really appreciate it. And again,
Well, thank you so much for asking me. It was just great. I really enjoyed doing it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
These are all the folks that would have been with us in 2020, and we were completely brokenhearted that we could not all be there in 2020. We've many of us have made it through, and here we are.
Oh, Jenny, I hope you do something. What are you going? I don't want to know what it is you're going to do this weekend. You don't have to tell us.
There you
Put
go.
it in your memoir.
Exactly.
All right.
So thanks so much. And again, this will be available to everybody in the recorded session. So
Okay, thank
thanks
you.
again.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye, everybody.